When it comes to foreign policy, every country has a full spectrum of strategies, of avenues, of venues in which they can use to engage other countries. The most basic is bilateral. One country talks to another country. In most countries that have diplomatic relations will have an ambassador in each place. That's probably the most common form of international relations. I think everybody's familiar with it. But beyond the bilateral, there are also regional organizations. Think about the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Australia has a lot of, we have some different relations with our near neighbors of New Zealand. Also, if you think about the European Union or a range of other economic or security agreements that are grouped together by region. There are also treaty alliances where you work together with countries like the United States, where you have a treaty alliance. In the case of Australia, think about post-World War II, or actually during World War II, the Five Eyes intelligence sharing agreement between the United States, the UK, New Zealand, Canada, and Australia. That's become a really important basis for a lot of the engagement that we do. There are also a lot of other groupings that are grouped together by topic or by relative economic size. And so if you look at the G20, that's the top 20 economies in the world. You look at the G7, that's the top G7 economies in the world. And often at the G7, they'll invite Australia and South Korea that don't quite make the cut, but that are really important partners in that endeavor. Obviously, the G7 doesn't include every one of the top 7 because China's not there, and Russia, which had been part of then the G8, is no longer. So they're expressions of how we go about doing our business. Australia has been well known historically for being among the most full-throated of multilateralists. So multilateralism is something that goes beyond just the bilateral, the small groupings, subgroupings, sub-regional, or even regional groupings, and tends to be global in nature. And that is because Australia as a country has early on determined that it most benefited from what we call the rules-based order, establishing a common basis for how economic activity is organized, how trade is done, the rules under which investment is done, the rules around transparency for that investment or that trade, the rules around the environmental treatment or the treatment of humans or anti-slavery, a whole range of other issues. Australia has decided that they wanted to work through the United Nations, through the World Trade Organization, and to work on a multilateral basis because Australia was pretty confident in its own offerings economically. Many of you would say that Australia kind of unilaterally disarmed rather than negotiate reductions of tariffs between other countries. We just basically limited tariffs because we needed foreign products for our own economy and wanted them, and we were confident in the saleability of our agriculture products and our other energy and minerals exports to the world, that we didn't want tariffs placed on them. And so we tended to become one of the most open economies in the world, one of the most free trading economies in the world, and in the process, one of those economies that most depended on that rules-based order, the international system. And so wherever you are, whatever the issue, whether it's the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, whether it's, treaties on the Arctics, or the Antarctic, pretty much wherever you go, you will find Australian participation. Because even though it may not be of direct interest to Australia, building a robust system is something that Australia has long deemed in its interest. And part of that is because of our relative size. You're familiar with the old adage that might makes right. The rules-based order, or the liberal international system, or multilateralism, is essentially an attempt to mitigate the temptation to have might make right. You don't want an international system that's just based on who's the strongest, who has the biggest military, who has the biggest economy. What you want is an international system that is based on law, or rules, or organizations, or standards, or norms. And so Australia, with its large landmass but relatively small population, has thought, rightfully I believe, that it most benefits when there are rules of the road, when there are standards, institutions, norms, organizations, treaties, international laws upon which it can rely. And so you will find Australian diplomats, Australian political leaders, Australian security officials, military officials, often referring to that rules-based order and multilateralism kind of in the same sentence, because you reinforce that rules-based order by participating proactively in a multilateral sphere.